This description describes how to connect the power takeoff, PTO, to the Nissan Patrol gearbox using various systems. Naturally, the PTO is simply bolted to the Nissan Patrol GQ 4.2 gearbox after removing the cover. Instead, for the Nissan Patrol GU 3.0 gearbox, the following kit is available. Housing. Third gear intermediate shaft. If you have a Nissan Patrol GU 4.2 transmission without a PTO port, you don't need a gear and intermediate shaft, just the 4.2 transmission housing and PTO. The GU 4.2 transmission looks the same from the outside as the 3.0 transmission, but it doesn't have the aluminum spacer ring for clutch housing. The most reliable way to determine which gearbox you're dealing with is to count the number of teeth on the third gear sprockets. After removing the top gear control cover, count the teeth on the second sprocket on the clutch side with the beveled teeth. We need a 4.2 gearbox, meaning a 35-tooth sprocket. Through the PTO port, you can see both pairs of gears of this third gear. The PTO shown in the photo is not original. It came from another car and was adapted by me to the Patrol's gearbox. The backlash should be between 0.15 and 0.30 mm. Since this would be difficult to achieve on the car, I took the opportunity to change the third gear sprockets from 4.2 gearbox to my 3.0 gearbox and adjusted it with the gearbox open. Adjustment involves placing the appropriate number of shims between the gearbox housing and the PTO housing. This is what these gears look like up close. Checking gear backlash using a dial indicator. This is the gear mesh after installing the input shaft. The original PTO features an aluminum housing with a front output shaft and is considered relatively weak. Therefore, it is valued more as a collector's item. Bottom view of the PTO installed. Original PTO parts diagram. Original PTO drive shaft. Original PTO winch. Original PTO control assembly. And here is the previously mentioned aftermarket PTO. It is a Bizarris unit, Spanish manufacturer, part number 036402, designed for Nissan vehicles, although it is not specifically dedicated to the Nissan Patrol. To ensure a proper fit, additional 15.5 mm spacers were required. I used an original gasket along with two steel plates, one 5 mm thick and the other 10 mm thick. For mounting, I used 5 M10 by 1.25 bolts, 45 mm long, and 1 M10 by 1.25 stud, 65 mm long, at the top. The dimensions for these spacers are shown here. If you are laser or plasma cutting these, you should do as I did and split the 15 mm thickness into two pieces. This is because laser and plasma cutters struggle with holes smaller in diameter than the plate's thickness. This issue doesn't exist with water jet cutting. As for the material, I used steel plate due to costs, but aluminum could also be used. It should be noted that power from this PTO can only be taken to the rear. The unit is significantly larger than the original, leaving no room for a front-facing shaft output next to the clutch lever. I ordered an SAE 1100 series flange for the shaft. This is the exact same flange used, for example, in the Polonaise car. The control mechanism for this PTO is located on top. I ordered the mechanical control version. This is a similar power takeoff unit made by the Turkish manufacturer Cosmiksan. And here are a few other custom PTO solutions for the Nissan Patrol. Unlike the previous PTO, the drive is taken from behind the gearbox. This offers the advantage that the PTO can operate at different ratios depending on the selected gear. For instance, a PTO acting as a spacer between the gearbox and the transfer case. It is approximately 40 mm thick and the drive is transferred to the outside via 4 gear wheels. The next option required a modification to the Nissan Patrol's housing. One of the 4 housing segments, the second one from the front, has an aluminum casing welded onto it, which forms the PTO. Here is another similar variation of that idea. However, in this case, not one but 2 segments of the transfer case housing have been modified. And here is a completely different approach to building a PTO. It involves mating a Nissan Patrol gearbox with a Toyota Land Cruiser 70 transfer case via an intermediate adapter, to which a custom PTO is then connected. And now I will present my own original project, which involves mating a Rober 4x4 truck transfer case to a Nissan Patrol gearbox. In certain versions, this transfer case features a built-in PTO. This transfer case has a cast iron housing and features power outputs to both the front and rear, located at the bottom right. The transfer case controls are positioned at the top right. The PTO control is located on the left side below the PTO shaft. This layout can potentially lead to oil leaks in that area. This transfer case is quite heavy, weighing in at 70 kilograms, approximately 154 pounds. For comparison, the Nissan Patrol transfer case with an aluminum housing but without a PTO weighs 60 kilograms, approximately 132 pounds. To connect the drive from the gearbox, I used the main components of a Nissan Terrano 2 rear drive shaft. The spline on this shaft matches the spline of the gearbox output shaft. I simply connected the two end components, the splined yoke and the flanged yoke, using a universal joint. The resulting short joint can compensate for minor misalignment between the gearbox and the transfer case. The spline itself was shortened to keep the entire assembly as compact as possible. To connect the Terrano shaft and the Patrol shafts to the Rober truck flanges, I fabricated the necessary adapter plates. Drive shaft view with the Rober truck flange removed. I made the main transfer case bracket from 5mm, approximately 3/16 of an inch, thick steel plate. It consists of a main plate bolted to the gearbox and main ribs bolted to the Rober truck transfer case. These main ribs have additional reinforcements. On the right side, there is a bracket for mounting the controls. These additional horizontal ribs at the bottom were added to reinforce the main plate bolted to the gearbox. Without these ribs, the main plate would deflect under load. And here is a close-up of the control mechanism. When designing the ribs, I included slots for positioning tabs. This made the assembly much easier. The opening for each tab is oversized by 0.2 millimeters, approximately 0.008 inches, to allow for tolerances. Initial assembly of the drive shafts showed that the front drive shaft may collide with the gearbox housing near the right-hand gearbox mount. This occurs because the center-to-center distance in the Rober truck transfer case is smaller than in the Nissan Patrol unit. Simply put, the front output in the Nissan Patrol transfer case extends further to the right to clear the gearbox. In contrast, the Rober truck transfer case is factory mounted separately from the Rober gearbox, so its front output does not need to clear the gearbox housing. Therefore, I modified the front drive shaft to have a smaller diameter near the gearbox mount. In this section, I used a solid steel shaft instead of a tube. Additionally, I ground down the gearbox housing at the mounting point. Current view of the modified front drive shaft. View of the PTO controls. This is what the connection of all rear drive shafts looks like. This chassis comes from a Nissan Patrol with a modified wheelbase of 2,600 millimeters, approximately 102 inches. The rear axle drive shaft must run at an angle. The winch comes from a BRDM military vehicle and is positioned so that the rope drum and the winch drive do not interfere with the rear drive shaft. The winch drive shaft also runs at an angle. It appears that this setup would not fit in a short wheelbase Nissan Patrol with a 2,400mm, approximately 94.5 inches, wheelbase. To summarize the PTO topic for the Nissan Patrol, the simplest approach is to use a PTO unit that fits the 4.2 housing gearbox. On the other hand, the most efficient system, which allows for changing the PTO speed by shifting gears in the gearbox, is when the power takeoff is driven from the transfer case. In the next video, I will describe in detail all the similarities and differences between the Nissan Patrol 3.0 and 4.2 gearboxes.